something else you need that I could get?
Pardon me?
I say, is there something else you need that I can get?
Oh, no, you're fine. Do you remember your grandparents very well?
Yes.
You do?
Uh-huh.
What were their names?
My grandmother Wade,
Uh-huh.
her name was Mary Savannah Wilson Wade, and I think they came from Indiana.
Uh-huh.
But my grandfather Wade, I never saw him. He died in the 80s sometime, before that. And my other family, the Fitzgeralds, the Irish side of the family.
Who was that? That was
my mother's family.
your mother's family?
Yes, and they came from the South, back in the Carolinas. In fact, the Holds, my grandmother Fitzgerald was a Hold. The Holds.
Oh, H-O-L-T?
H-O-L-T.
Oh, yeah.
There's a little town just out of Kansas City that's named Hold. And that was the farm of the Holt family. See,
And so they were, that was,
my grandmother Fitzgerald was a Hold.
oh,
So,
wow.
and that that little town is there.
Also, then she married a guy named Fitzgerald, right?
Fitzgerald.
Where was he from?
He was from that same area, but they had come out from the South too. So.
Any idea on like the European continent where we came
Oh,
from
well,
in Europe?
they originally were from Ireland, the Fitzgeralds.
Mm-hmm.
And before they when they came to Ireland, they came from Italy. There
Oh,
was
really?
Geraldino or something like that.
Well, no wonder.
So way back there, they're Italians and Irish, and then the Wades are English and Welsh.
Mhm.
So
What do you know when we came over to this country or anything like that? Any idea? Was
I
it
have no
before the
idea. They
Revolutionary War?
said the Fitzgerald, the history back there, they had, the first they have that we remember is in Kentucky. But they originally came from Ireland, but when? Because they said the courthouse in Kentucky in this town, which I don't know, burned. So that burned up all the
records.
all the old records of the Irish. So, but they originally came from Italy, near Florence. So.
What about your parents?
My father came from Iowa and my mother from Missouri,
Uh-huh.
and they met in Eastern Oregon.
Oh, around by Joseph Enterprise?
Over around Enterprise, and they were married in Somerville, and Harold, my brother, was born at Somerville.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Then they went back to Iowa. So
They were married in what year?
the folks were married in 1890. Harold was born in 91, so, and some around 92 or 3 they went back to
Why did they
Iowa.
go back to Iowa after?
Grandmother Wade wanted them to come back there. So, you see, when Grandfather Wade died, he was in Chicago. He was a stock buyer there. And Dad was in school at Shenandoah, Iowa, business school. And Aunt Cora, the one that painted the pictures, and she was at the Art Institute in Chicago. But when their father died, well, that stopped all the schools and everything. And then Grandfather Wade had all these brothers and his family that were in Eastern Oregon. Dad came out here then, and he worked in Uncle Jess's store in Somerville. And my mother's family came out and they had a sheep ranch. And she was working in a newspaper office when they were married, so, in LeGrand, so.
were born in
Seymour.
Seymour, Iowa.
Uh-huh.
So he was-
1894.
Is that where his mother was born? In Seymour?
Yeah. Mhm.
And Harold was born in Somerville.
Harold was born in Somerville, and Herman and I were born in Seymour.
What was Seymour like?
It was just a little town. At that time, it was about perhaps 3,000 something. It was a coal mining town.
Where's Seymour? I've always tried to find Seymour on a map of Iowa.
Well, it's in the very southern part.
By Missouri?
We were only about 8 or 10 miles from the Missouri line, weren't we?
Oh.
So, and just a little southeast of Des Moines. So that's where we all went. And
What kind of jobs did our grandparents or your grandparents have and your parents have?
well, my father, he was a rural mail carrier, so until he retired. We lived on a farm when I was quite small. We had lived in the country. That's where I started school. So then we moved back to town. I think about 1903 or something is when Dad started on the mail route. And then he retired from there, so,
Well, then you finished high school there.
yes, we.
And then, didn't you teach school there?
I taught school at Powersville, Missouri, a country school. I made all the fires and carried in my coal, and recess and noon I played ball with the kids, but I was a rotten ball player.
What
I
grades were
walked
they?
about a mile to school so, in the wintertime too, so.
What grades did you teach?
Everything from primary to the 8th. I had 3 great big boys in the 8th grade that were larger than I was. So that kept me on my toes. And then I had them, I think the most of them were in the 4th and 5th grades. I had some in the primary. And I think usually had about 25 to 30 kids. So,
When did you become interested in nursing?
well, I'd always wanted to, but then nobody seemed to think I should. Then after my mother was gone, why, I stayed home for almost 2 years and kept house. I worked part-time in a doctor and dentist's office. And then in 1917, my mother died in 1915. 1917, I went to Chicago in training. So,
And what hospital was that?
Wesley Memorial, which is now Northwestern Memorial. We were affiliated with Northwestern University.
And you stayed how long in Chicago then?
Pardon?
How long were you in Chicago?
Then I stayed, after I was out of training in 1920, I stayed there and worked most of the 20s. I came out here in 25 to visit 2 of my friends.
To Eugene, Oregon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I came to stay a couple of weeks, and they talked me into staying. I stayed a year. I sent home and got my uniforms. Irma sent me the uniform. Then when it got cold weather, I sent back, she sent me my winter clothes. I'd taken everything out there, so. And then I stayed there about 2 or 3 years back there. I went back to Chicago and worked. Then I came out and visited an aunt for about 3 months. I stayed down in California at Glendale, and I worked there at a hospital. My Uncle Fred had a friend that was a doctor, and I met him, so I went to work. And then I back up here in 28, and I worked over here at the old hospital.
It was the old Sacred Heart.
Yeah, well, it was a Christian hospital. That is, the hospital was run by the Christian church then, by the school that's over there. And in 35, the sisters bought the hospital. So I supervised over there at the hospital and did private duty. And so when I came back down here, I knew a lot of the people here too. So
Then we came out in 1940,
Yeah.
Mom and Dad and I, and, no,
41.
41.
No. Pat came home with me in 40 when I was back there. And then you came out in March 41.
Was that what prompted the move to Oregon? Was it because Ruthie had said it was a great place?
So,
Is that why they came out here?
Well, there's very little opportunity there in Seymour for Dad.
no, there wasn't anything particularly. He was at the courthouse
County
over
auditor.
in Corydon
Yeah, completed 2 terms.
several
So then-
years, about 4 or 5 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So,
So I know when we came out here, Dad was looking for work, and it took him quite a while to find a job. I know that he unloaded carloads of beer up here from McDonald Candy Company, and
Yeah.
stuffed
And-
the money section into the Eugene Registered Yard.
and he was at the water, he worked for the water board too, didn't he, in
Yes,
the
and he
office
finally had a
there?
job at the water
Uh-huh.
board through St. Faith.
And that's where he met
Mhm.
Faith.
And then
He went to work for the,
U.S. Department of Labor
Mhm.
then.
Mm.
But then when did you went to Portland during the war to work for the?
I went to Vancouver
Mhm.
and worked for the Kaiser. I was in the outpatient department. I worked there about 3 years during the war. So,
Then you stayed in Portland, right after?
and then I stayed up there, and I worked in the meantime a few months out at Forest Grove for a doctor. And
Is that when you moved into Everett?
that was in 47. The nurse that was there was having surgery, so I stayed there till she came back. Then I went back to Portland, and I went up at the medical school in 48. And I stayed up there till I retired in 61. And I had the pediatrics outpatient clinic. So. And I retired in 61 and went back, worked part-time till I think it was 67 or 68. I decided, why did I retire? So I just quit. So,
Is there anything about your grandmother or your parents, about their personality that was kind of, that made them characters?
Grandmother Wade was one of the most marvelous individuals. She loved to fish. She smoked a pipe. And I can see her sitting down there at Wade's Pond with her sunbonnet on, smoking her pipe and fishing.
Wade's Pond, huh?
You remember that, don't you?
bet I
Bill?
do.
All the kids went swimming there, so,
Didn't they used to save ice or something on Wade's Pond? Or?
yeah, they, in the wintertime, Uncle Worth had the ice, and had a great big ice house, and he had the ice.
So how many aunts and uncles did you have?
Dad had one brother
Mm-hmm.
and 2 sisters, and then my mother had 3 sisters and 3 brothers. And all the family are gone now. The only one in my father's family is Fern over at a cousin over in Boise. She's moved back to Boise.
But of course they've had children and things. And
She had a brother and sister, and they had children there down in Georgia and around and in Ohio. But she had just one daughter, and she's gone. So she and I are, I guess, about all of our father's family. her mother and my father were brothers and sisters.
What about your parents? What about their personality? Anything
Well,
as far as?
Bill can tell you more about my grandfather, or I mean my father. He helped raise Bill. And my mother was, well, you didn't walk on her toes. She had the Irish, I guess. Her name was Adeline Catherine Fitzgerald before she was married. So, but she was very exacting, and she loved to garden. Always had lots of flowers and things. And my dad, he was, I think, rather easygoing. So.
She died at an early age.
She died in 1915. She was just 44 years old. She died.
What'd she die of? Yeah.
Pernicious anemia. So that was before they got all the new treatments. I know one of the doctors in Chicago said that was probably just about 2 years before they came up with some of the better treatments. So. And Harold was in the First World War. He never got overseas, though. He was in Oglethorpe, Fort Oglethorpe. That's where he met Minnie. So. And Hiram and Herma were married in 1920. Hiram's family were an old family in Seymour. So.
Oh, do you know much about that family, the Evanses? As far as like his parents or anything like that, were they around?
Hiram's?
Uh-huh.
Well, they were farmers, and they had a big farm there. The city of Seymour was built on parts of 4 different farms, and one was my grandfather Wade's, and John Fox, and a Dr. Rogers, and Hiram Evans, Bill's grandfather.
Well, his name was Hiram too, wasn't it?
It was built, that town is built on they all had part of it. So.
Well, Grant tells the story. I remember that he rode on the first steam engine that came.
He rode in the first steam engine that rung the bell in that county. That when the railroad went through there, our town. So. And his father was always quite prominent with a lot of things in the town because he originally had been a school teacher, and he owned a lot of land, had a big farm there. That's why he didn't come to Oregon. He came to Oregon, but he went back because he had a lot of land there. And his brothers and sisters, there was a large family of them, they all came to Eastern Oregon. I think there were about 7 boys in the family and 4 girls. They all came to Eastern Oregon, but my grandfather didn't stay. At one time, Grandmother Wade gave me a log that he had kept on the way when they came out in the wagon train. And in this log, it was, they went so many miles today, and when they made camp, they, by such and such river and the water, but they had the water. And another day they went so many miles, and it was good camping area that night with the buffalo chips for fire.
Oh, really? When was this?
And that I gave that book to Aunt Jo Smerritt, his sister, and no one seems to know what became of it. It was, some of it was, you couldn't read, it wasn't legible, but some of it was legible, that you could get little bits of it here and there.
And who was
'Cause
that did that?
it had been long, long time.
That was,
That would have been in the 80s.
That was
sometime.
Gramps when he came out.
Graham's family.
Yeah, when they came out into Iowa.
oh, they
Well,
went
I mean,
He
to
came
East
from
Oregon.
there to Oregon.
Okay,
Oregon.
Well, I bet that took a long time to get from Iowa to Oregon on a wagon train.
Well, they did. That's the way most of them came.
Mhm.
I guess some of the later ones, the younger ones.
Well,
A great-grandfather Wade is buried over here at Somerville in that beautiful little cemetery.
We've been there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then when Gramps went back to Iowa, they went back on the train.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they went back.
Whatever happened to that farm? And, when his father passed away, Gramps went back to,
Well, they had sold and built the big old house. They had
Mhm.
sold the farm.
Mhm.
And they had built the big old house, you remember that?
Mhm.
That. And that's where grandmother lived when he died. He was in Chicago. He
Mhm.
heart attack and died there. It's been a long time ago.
Yeah.
On the east side, Seymour is built on a square, as you remember, Bill. And on the east side was an alleyway that came up from the street to the square. The streets around the square, and in the center was a park. And one time, the city was going to sell that alleyway. Someone wanted to buy it to put up a building. And Dad heard about it. And see, that town was laid out, that area, on his father's farm.
The square?
Yes. And when Dad heard about them wanting, the city going to sell it, he went to them and told them they couldn't sell it because that was given to the city to build on, or to make the city, but they could not sell it. So they've never sold, and it can't be sold to a private person to build on.
I'd like to go back there someday. I wouldn't know. I'd probably have to go back with you because I wouldn't know where to look for anything.
Well, Aunt Pat can remember more about Seymour than I can. I
Yeah.
just remember it as a
Pat
little boy.
could tell
growing
you a
up.
lot about it.
Oh, yeah, she could tell
Yeah.
me Seymour
Yeah.
around.
Are there any relatives there? Any Evanses or Wades and Seymour?
Well, Hiram's father has a sister there, Angie's there. I think she's in a nursing home.
And then Dad's other sister, Aunt Hattie, is up in
Albia,
Albia
in a nursing home.
Yeah, we haven't heard from them how they are.
So,
But,
but Dad's youngest brother has a son that's there, Ferris. I think he had a filling station and some kind of a store or something, but he sold that and they said he'd retired. But I wouldn't know him at all because they were much younger than we were, and I just haven't been back there, so. And there's none of the family, I don't think there's anybody in town but Janice Seidels that I know.
Does the town look the same?
So,
It look the same.
no, of course, last time I was back there was in '56, so that,
no. I was there in '55, I haven't been there since Dad, we went back there then.
mhm.
Your mother and Hiram had been there, so,
Well, Dad went back to a reunion of some sort, didn't he?
yeah.
Yeah.
That was in in the 40s, I think he went back there. So. Well, I'm the only one in the family, in our family. And I think other than grandmother Wade, she was past 90, I'm the oldest. So
What's your secret?
I'm not telling. No, Dad was 88 and a half. He liked just a few days being just the half of year.
Mhm.
But I will be the half year tomorrow. No, today, the 13th.
Is that right? Wow.
Uh-huh. See, my birthday's 13th of February. So I've made the half.
All three of the children were born on the 13th.
What?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Harold is June, Hermel is September, and I'm February. I always said I didn't know whether it was good luck for my mother or whether it was bad luck. We had a baby brother, though. That was the youngest one. He was born in 1902. That was in January the 20th. So, but he only lived about 3 months.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know
Yeah.
that. That's interesting.
So,
How did you guys get along well when you were growing up? Were you part in age, Harold and Herma and you?
well, we were all went to school there
Mhm.
in through the grades in high school. And I went to summer school one year over at Corydon, and then that was that fall that I taught. And I had thought that if I was going to teach, I always wanted to teach history. I loved ancient history with all the old myths and things.
Oh, yeah.
But after my mother was sick and I didn't go that fall, I just stayed at home those 2 years. And then I taught that fall. And then I went in training in 1917. So,
I feel like Thomas Snyder.
yeah. And I got so homesick after I'd been out there a while, they put me in the children's department. And I wrote home and told Dad that I was sick. I thought I'd better come home. And he wrote back and he said, if you come home now, you'll be home a little while, you want to go back, and then they wouldn't let you back. So you try it another month and then see how you get along. I think you're homesick. That made me furious for them to think I was homesick. So I thought, I'll just show them, and I stuck it out. So, but I had a lot of friends there that helped me out. I think that's why.
What was the first car that your family had?
Ford.
What year was that, do you know?
It was in the 20s. In the 20s, Dad bought his first Ford in 1921.
It's been a Model
Model T, wasn't it? So. And I don't know how many Fords he had.
Well,
He was driving a Plymouth when they came out here. He had a Plymouth.
He used a team, though, to deliver mail up until he bought the Model T, right?
Oh,
A team and
he was using the Ford when he was delivering the mail.
when he delivered mail, though, didn't he get something like $30 a month or something like that
$50, as I remember.
to supply his own team?
Yeah.
And then he got a salary on top of that of what?
Well, that's all they made. That's all they were paid when he began the mail,
Deliver mail.
because everything then was much different than it is now. As I told Les one time, when I was first out of training, we worked what they call 20-hour. We got $5 a day, 20-hour duty. Les says, No, it was Paula said, well, I wouldn't have worked for that. See, she's a nurse now and it's a high salary. I said, that's what everybody was getting, so what could you do about it? So,
Well, when did you, Gramps and Mom and Dad buy the place on East, well, they lived in town?
we lived out on the north side. We bought that house out on North Third. You never lived there, the girls both have lived there. And I had a letter from Janice Silas. They bought that in 1903, I think, or 1903 or 1904. And I think they paid $1,000 for it. And there was 2 lots and a 5-roomed house and had a barn. And we lived out there. Well, the house is still standing because Janice Seidel wrote and said that that house was still livable. People were living there. So that's been a long time. But they built houses differently than they do now. And I think it was in around 1930, wasn't it, when they bought the house down
Henderson Place?
Henderson, east part of town. And that was a lovely place, wasn't it? It was about 10 acres there, a great big house and orchards and barn. And Bill always had dogs.
Oh, yes. What year was it that Gramps broke his wrist cranking the Model T Ford or starting to start it? Do you remember that?
I don't remember what year that was.
But he did, though, if I'm remembering.
Way back when, anyway, so.
You know, the Model T used to kick back and break wrists. Gramps popped his wrist.
Yeah, that's the way they all had to be started, crank them.
Remember when Gramps was roller skating there in Seymour? Like
He-
65 plus? He was more older than that.
Well, when the kids were in high school there, he was roller skating, so, and when I think that was in the early 20s, he and I went to Topeka to visit grandmother Fitzgerald, and she lived with Aunt Sally and Uncle Charlie, and they had 3 children, and we went down to the amusement park, and I went on the merry-go-round with the kids, and Dad was roller skating with them. So I never learned to roller skate. I spent most time sitting on the floor, so I gave up. And we used to go ice skating on the ponds and the creeks. We'd go in the evening and we'd build a fire and skate. I never got to be an excellent skater. I did skate, but not too much, so. And we used to have bobsled parties. And the boys would get somebody's big bobsled and the team, and we'd go out in the country. We had friends out in the country, kids that we knew. We'd take some things and we'd go out there and stay till all hours and get home in wee hours. So. And the boys would drive up to a farmhouse and they'd call and somebody'd come to the door and they'd ask them if they had an axe or a saw or something. They'd say, oh yes, whoever it was. And they'd say, well, it's a good thing to have, and then we'd drive off. And we had sleigh bells on the horses. I think Pat has. Dad gave Pat the sleigh bells that he had. So.
You know that watch that it was given to Wade that Gramp had?
Mm-hmm.
When did he get that? Do you recall?
I have no idea.
I recall as a youngster sitting on Gramps' lap and always listening to him how he'd wind it,
Play with the watch.
play with the watch, but that's, Wade has that now. I thought you might know when it was purchased or,
Do you have it?
you know, it's in a safety
Oh,
deposit.
yeah, I was.
Yeah, but it's, I was just trying to get a little history
Great
on the
big
watch
old
itself.
watch.
Great
you know.
big heavy thing, weighs a pound and a half.
I used to hear from Aunt Jo Smerritt, and she'd say she'd been downtown, she'd seen Dad. She said, "Spring is here. I saw your father in the old Ford. In the back seat was Pat, hanging out one side, and Snow, the little white dog they had his head out the other side. So, and she said, then you'd see him again, there'd be 2 or 3 kids in the back seat, and they'd all have an ice cream cone."
Do you recall when Gramps got that Model T that he cut and made a pickup out of it?
No.
Do you remember that?
That was one of the way back when, but I don't know. He made a pickup truck out of one of them. Well, the last one, then it was with that then he bought the Plymouth, what didn't he? He went to Des Moines and bought the Plymouth. So, but he used to take the kids to ball games and put them in that pickup truck. So, he liked all kinds of sports. And I don't think they missed the ball game. Sometimes late in the fall, football, they'd have to go to another town. And I know your mother said she'd be afraid it was icy or something, but it never was too icy for Dad to take a load of kids, so.
This tape's gonna be around probably for 500 years, this tape I'm making.
Oh, well,
Yeah, well, and do you have any kind of like words of wisdom or advice or anything that you might be able to address, say like my grandchildren or their children or just future
Somebody.
generations? Any kind of
well,
words of wisdom that you might bestow upon future generations of our family?
well, I don't know. Of course, times change a lot differently. What I have seen when I was younger than what it is now.
Mhm. People are still basically the same though, aren't they?
But I think that everybody has to take and go with the times. Because you don't do the things now that we did when we were younger. It's far different.
Yeah, but you've accepted all these changes in your life though, Ruthie, really.
Oh, I've tried to grow with it. Just like Dilly's over here. They get real noisy. See, they're open till 2 o'clock.
Yeah, that's that Western.
And they have country western music. And of course they have big crowds. They say you go in there at 1 o'clock in the morning, you stand in line. And gets real noisy. And the people on this side of the house, one lady called me one morning, asked me if I heard it. I said, I don't hear the music so well, but I hear the noise and talking when they leave, I think most of it is. And someone decided they should do something about it. And they found out ordinance number so-and-so at so-and-so, the city of Eugene, and they had it typed up and had everybody signing it on this side of the house. It was too much noise. They couldn't sleep. I said, I hear it. If I stay up till all hours anyway. I've always been a night owl.
Mm.
When I do go to bed, I just pull the cover up around my head and forget about it. And noise doesn't bother me that much. I didn't sign it because it didn't bother me. Why should I sign it? But I said, I bet everybody that signed that, when they were young like that, they were in bed at 9 o'clock.
Beautiful. Oh, yeah.
So that's the way I feel about
Yeah.
living. You live and let live.
Yeah.
Can you see both of us here?
No, not yet. Yeah, you gotta get closer. I can see just.
Why don't you zoom it out, Dad? Just pull that thing back towards you. How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you, Ruthie. That was a great interview.
Well,
Something that's
if
really
I'd
gonna be
known about it,
priceless.
I would have thought about a few things otherwise.
Well, it's best that it's just kind of like off the top of your head, I think,
Well,
yeah.
it was, absolutely.
Because these cameras and lights have a tendency, you know, to be really inhibiting sometimes, but, well, you sure can remember that stuff. I can't even remember when I was 3 years old.
I can remember when we lived in the country and I was about 4 years old.
Oh, really?
I always have had a bad ankle, and when I was first started school, I wore this heavy black leather brace around there. I was embarrassed to death with that thing on my leg. So, and when I'd sit down where I could, I'd always sit on this foot.
Oh, you'd hide it?
Yeah.
Oh.
So nobody could see that old leather brace thing on it. So. But
Just go to 250.
It goes forever and ever.
No, I meant tape though, you gotta.
Oh, it'll click off when it runs
Oh,
out.
okay. Yeah. Just make sure.
Why don't you come over here too, Dad?
You bet.
Yeah.
I can get over here on
Just
one
have
side.
all of
'Cause I
us.
know where this. Yeah,
Here we are.
Here we are.
Three generations here. Hi
there.
We're talking to people that are going to be watching this 100 years from now. Hi.
Maybe 200.
Maybe
Yeah.
200,
Yeah.
yes. Keep it clean.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
take care.
Yeah.
So, have fun.
Yeah, have fun.
have fun.
Take it from
That's
her.
right.
Have fun.
Yeah, that's right.
Have fun.
I can't understand why you won't tell us the secret though. I'm getting to be
Yeah,
80.
really.
I
You have
just
to be a
live
female.
and let live.
Well, you've sure done that.
And you have to look beyond a lot of things. You don't take things too seriously. There's a few things you do have to take seriously, but then why sit around and worry about it?
That's true.
That's right.
As
That's
I
a
used
good
to
rule
tell
of
a
life.
friend of mine in Portland, where I can't do anything about it. Is it?
I think on that note, we should get some lunch.
All right.
Thanks.
That's the way I feel about it. Like the old colored woman said, well, I'm concerned about a lot of things, but where I can't do anything about it, the hell with it. Of course, I didn't say that out loud to everybody, but that's what I'd say.
What's the name of that mountain up there?
That's Spencer View,
Huh.
and that's Skinner. Well, see, you can see the Coast Range over there.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty good.
Los Angeles.
You can see things.
Yeah, it's so hard because when I get into Oregon, I'm so used to just seeing a quarter mile away because of the smog. Now my eyes have to refocus for the distance.
You can, the hills back here at night when the lights are on, I go past the job. I couldn't believe that it built up some of the most beautiful homes here.
He said, no problem. That's a nice thing about that thing. You can take a picture anytime you want to.
Yeah. I like this shot though. My grip. Are you in the Union?
Gopher.
Yeah, right.